Hey everyone, it's me, John Walther. So I'm starting this tutorial series. It's the ultimate beginner's guide for Houdini for games. And this is episode 1. So how do you learn Houdini? Well, first of all, is Houdini too hard to learn, as some people say? No, obviously not. You make that decision for yourself if it's too hard for you to learn, right? And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by trying to learn it. So this is what episode 1's about. We're going to try Houdini, and hopefully by the end you'll have an idea whether or not you're interested in learning more. So how do you learn Houdini? Well, if you want to do it the long, hard way, what's hard about learning Houdini is the discipline, right? You need to put in the hours, and that's not fun, right? Doing work is not fun. That's what's hard. But if you're a person that's disciplined and you're good at doing work, then probably you're going to be very good at learning Houdini. Out of 1,000 people that watch this video, maybe 3 people will actually do the full tutorial and learn something and really, really learn a lot, is what I mean, right? So if you're one of those people, you're already way better than 99% of people. So now, if you go on the Side Effects website, you have the Houdini 19.5 Foundations book by Robert McGee, which has 9 chapters, each of which are about an hour long, and these will teach you the basics of Houdini. But if you don't have the patience to do that, this video is for you. We're going to try to go through the basics a lot faster, right? So let's go inside Houdini. So first of all, if you don't have Houdini, go to download, create an account, and download the apprentice version, which is free, right? If you don't have a version of Houdini. So now inside Houdini, don't be scared by all of the buttons and stuff because you don't really need most of them. So don't worry about it. And this is going to be one of the main themes is don't worry about things that you don't need to worry about. This is how you're going to learn Houdini quickly is by not getting caught up in the details that don't really matter, right? So one of the quickest ways to get started with Houdini if you're in games is the terrain tools. So if you go up here, you have at the top here, you have these shelf tools, right? If you click these different tabs, you have different shelf tools. The ones on the right here are for FX. So we'll look at that a bit at the end. But here on the left, we have terrain FX. And these are the terrain shelf tools. So if I click terrain hills, the first one here, it's going to create this for me. And you notice here, it created all these nodes. So down here, this bottom right panel is the node network panel where all your nodes are going to live. And on each node, when you click on the node, you have parameters which go up here in this parameters panel. And basically, when I clicked this hills tool on the shelf tool, it created all of these nodes for me. And now I can see exactly how to make a sort of terrain like this because I have all the nodes. So if I go here to the top, I press the blue button, it's going to put the display flag here. I'm starting with an empty height field. And here I have the parameters. So if I increase the size, I can increase the size. I can also move it around. I can play with the resolution. And then the next node is height field noise. You can see the name here, right, or here. So if I put the flag here, well, all of a sudden I'm getting some noise. And you can play with these parameters. You can increase the amplitude of the noise. You can increase the element size. You can offset the noise, which is really cool. You can change the noise type. So if you do like whirly, for example, it's better for like rock. It looks more like a rock, right? Then they're using another noise at a higher amplitude or lower amplitude, sorry, with some distortion, right? And by the way, if you ever see any parameters in bold text, it means it was changed from the default. So if I hit Control Shift on these parameters, it's going to set them back to the default. So that's one way to understand how things are done, right? If you ever see something here, simplex is in bold. So if I control middle mouse click on the parameter label, it'll set it back to sparse convolution, which is the default, right? And then here the node splits into 2 branches because this node height field layer has 2 inputs. So here they're doing a height field noise, but here on the mask layer. So here instead of the height layer, they set it to mask, and that's why everything's red. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's a subtle fall off. Here it's slightly less red. So the mask is not 100% everywhere. And then they're using the height field slump, which is a very useful node. It creates a mask at the bottom of like valleys. It basically simulates like little rocks and pebbles falling down the slope of your terrain and accumulating at the bottom. So this is very useful when if you want to generate a mask for your terrain for like having a bunch of little twigs, little rocks at the bottom of your slopes. It gives a very nice look visually. And then here we're using the height field isolate layer on mask. So this is going to, so if I middle mouse here, and again, you see tons of data, might be scary, but don't be scared. You don't really care about most of this data. What you do care about is these 6 grid volumes here, and especially the height and the mask volumes. And then when I isolate the layer, if you middle mouse here, I just have the height and the mask. And the height, as you can see, it was set to 0 except for where the mask is applied. And then here, they're using a height field noise just on the mask to add a little bit of, noise on these masked areas. And then all of that is layered back into the original height field. They give this kind of thing that I completely destroyed when I changed all the settings here. But if we put it back to simplex, it's sorta okay. Put some stuff back on. So there you go. And then finally a height field erode, which is going to do an erosion simulation. So if you press this button, freeze frame at 20, it'll simulate up to frame 20 without you having to scrub the timeline. And this will create some erosion, like water erosion. Erosion's based on like hydro and thermal erosion. If you press this button, you get the documentation. So every node pretty much has documentation that every single parameter is explained. So you can always learn more like that as well. So let's check out some of these other ones. So let's click the terrain mountain. So this one's really cool because this one starts with a handle. So you see these red edges, this spherical handle here. And you notice this button here on the left is selected. It's the show handle button. So if I press escape, it'll unselect that and I'll lose my handle. If I press enter, I'll get the handle back, right? So enter and escape toggle between these two modes. Now, if you're in handle mode and you left click, it'll control the handle, right? Whereas if I press escape and I left click, it'll control the camera. So that's very important thing to understand as a beginner, is whether or not you're in handle mode, right? So now I'm not in handle mode. If I press space G, it'll center the camera on what I have selected. I'm not sure if it's the display node or what you have selected, but if you're not centering the camera on what you want, make sure you have it selected, both the display flag and you're clicking, right? And then press space G, it'll center the camera. You can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel, and you can rotate the camera with the left click. Now that I'm happy with the camera position, I can put the handle, and again, the handle, you have to be on the tube, okay? This is something that you're just gonna learn how this stuff works the more you use Houdini, right? But basically, the way this is working is the tube has a handle, and then by controlling the tube handle, you can control how the mountain's going to be generated on your terrain. And then you can move it, you can even rotate it, which is kind of weird, but hey, why not? And whoops. And just like that, you can have procedural control over your mountain. So you have this tube. Again, this is what's happening under the hood, right? I have this tube that I'm controlling the handle. And then I have the height field, and I'm doing height field project. And I keep saying but again, I'm just clicking the shelf tools, right? These are all pre-configured workflows that are given to you by Houdini, right? These all come with Houdini. I didn't make any of these, right? So they have the height field project, which is going to project the tube onto the height field, as you can see here. So now the tube is actually part of the height field. And then height field blur, which as it suggests is going to blur. So instead of having these like sharp, ugly kind of whatever, when we put the blur, it's going to blur the height field. So it's going to look much better. Then we have height field distort by noise, which is going to add some noise. And then we have height field noise, which is going to run on the whole height field. I'm not sure exactly what the difference between these two nodes are. They're very similar. Obviously, they have different behavior, but I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. But again, you can go look in the documentation if you really want. The thing is, we don't really care, right? As long as it works, we don't need to go investigate how every single parameter works, right? So that's a big thing that'll make you successful in Houdini, is just the ability to be okay with not understanding everything. And finally, we have an erosion again. If I freeze frame at 20, just give it a second. So again, we have, I don't know why this white plane is appearing. Maybe it's like a bug in my Houdini or something, but anyway. So by the way, if you want to learn more about erosion, there's like 50 tutorials on the Side Effects website. I'll show you at the end where you can go find more tutorials. So let's turn these off. Let's look at a couple more. So we'll look at a few more, 3 more. So we'll look at the Moonscape. So Moonscape's really cool because it uses copy to points, which is one of the most powerful nodes in Houdini that's used in almost everything. So let's take a look at what's happening here. So we're starting with a grid, which is not to be confused with the height field. So the height field is a volume, right? It's really like a height field, whereas the grid is really geometry, right? It's like 10,000 points in this case. It doesn't matter how many points it is, but it's really geometry, right? And then we're feeding the grid into the scatter node. So if I press this button or this button, you can see all the points. So these points are being scattered onto the grid. So if you've ever used Unreal PCG, it's the same idea, right? You're scattering points on a surface. And then here, there's an attribute expression that's running on the attribute p scale. And now this, if you don't know how to code, this could be a bit confusing. And you might think, well, what does this mean? Well, the good thing, again, is you don't need to understand. So if you click here on the geometry spreadsheet, the geometry spreadsheet's a super cool feature in Houdini that lets you debug all your data. So every single point, so remember here we see all the points and they have numbers, right? So if I go here like point number 4, if I go here, it's actually here, point number 4, and I can see what its position is, and I can see the p-scale that was created by this node, right? So if I click here, I don't have a p-scale. If I click here, it creates the p-scale. So even if you don't understand what this code is doing, just by going in the geometry spreadsheet, you can see what it's doing. It's creating this p-scale attribute. And p-scale, by the way, it just means point scale. So it's an intrinsic Houdini attribute that's going to, when we do the copy to points in a second here, it's going to scale what we're copying based on the p-scale, okay? So what is this code doing? It's basically doing a fit rand on point number. So at ptnum is an intrinsic Houdini intrinsic Houdini attribute called point number. So that number is basically this number, right? Or if you look in the viewport, these numbers, right? Number 4, that's at ptnum, right? Each point has its own unique point number. And what this code is doing is it's saying rand point number. So it's generating a random number between 0 and 1 based on the point number. So each point will have a different random number. And then it's doing fit 0, 1. So it's fitting the random number, which is between 0 and 1, which is why it's called fit 0, 1. It's fitting that number between 0.5 and 1.5. Which again, if you look at the geometry spreadsheet, you see that we're getting values between 1.5 and if we go to the bottom, 0.5. And that's because the fit is fitting our random values. If I put this to 2.5, you're going to see some of the p-scales are going up to 2.5 now, right? So that's basically what's happening. And then we have a sphere, which they flattened a little bit in Y, right? Y axis is up, down in Houdini, right? So you see here, they made the Y 15, so a little bit smaller than X and Z, so it's flat. And then we're copying this onto the points. So the points that we had here, I'm going to turn off the point numbers, but the points that we had here, we're copying those spheres, and the spheres are randomly scaling based on their p-scale attribute that was set here randomly. And then finally, oh, I don't know what that is. Finally, doing a height field project again. So it's projecting using a minimum projection, right? If it's not minimum, it's not going to work. Using a minimum projection to create these craters in the height field. And then they're doing the same thing, but with a torus. And they're copying the torus using the same p-scale, same random p-scale. And that's giving these borders around the rings of the craters, which is cool. And then adding a little bit of distortion. And then finally, they're also scattering these tubes to create these holes, more depth into the craters. And then here you have some areas where you have craters on craters. It doesn't look that good, but they do a blur, they do a noise. Well, actually, it's my fault because I changed the scale, right? So if I put the scale back to 1.5, we get a lot less of that already. And you're doing a height field remap here. So height field remap lets you remap the height. So if you want to make it flatter or taller. And then doing a height field clip, which is going to clip off the top. So this is based on this value here. You can also put on a min clip. You could clip the bottom out. And yeah, that's how they do the moon. So let's look at the islands real quick. This one's pretty simple. Here you have some islands. So again, you have a height field. You have height field noise. Distort by noise. Then you have a clip for the water plane. So here they're controlling the height of the water plane like that. Height field remap, just a tiny subtle little remap. You don't even need this. By the way, you can use the yellow button to bypass nodes, turn them on or off without deleting them. So if you want to keep them. Here you have a volume wrangle where so a wrangle is just it's just a way to code using Houdini's programming language called Vex, which is based on C. And here it's just one line of code. He's saying set the mask value to 1 everywhere. So you don't even need a wrangle to do this. You can do this just by masking other ways using the masking nodes. And finally, he's doing a slump where he's removing part of the mask using the slump. I'm not even sure how he's doing this, to be honest. But again, you don't have to understand how everything works as long as it works. And you can even control visually. So even though I don't understand what's happening sort of mathematically here, algorithmically, I can still visually see what this slider is doing to the mask, right? And I can visually kind of go for the mask. You know, here it seems like he's trying to mask out the mountains, the slopes and stuff like that, right? So you can play with this to kind of get the look you want without even understanding how it works, which is cool. And again, you don't want to waste your time understanding things that don't matter. No one cares if you understand how something works. People care that you are able to do the job, right? And get the correct visual result. Doesn't mean you shouldn't understand anything. You should obviously try to understand as much as possible, but you shouldn't get caught up spending hours trying to understand like subtle things that don't actually make a difference, right? And then finally we're doing an erosion. If I press freeze frame at 20, few seconds. And then here doing another volume wrangle to set the water level. Actually, it's a bit weird because if you turn this off, or anyway, basically setting the water level based on the height, which is a bit weird way of doing it, but hey, if it works, right? And finally, let's look at the dunes. So this is cool for like deserts. So again, start at the top, we have a height field. We're using height field pattern. So you can play with these parameters. And you can change the pattern actually. You can use steps, is cool for terracing, right? So you have all this stuff built into Houdini for free. Very cool. So here now smaller, more subtle, or medium dunes, and then small dunes. So you can see that they're layering the dunes. Very cool. Here he's masking the first set of peaks, and he's blurring them. That's basically it. I want to show one more node, which is the mask by feature node. So if I go here, get off the erosion. If I increase the amplitude on this, right, so we get something a little more interesting. And then if I do, I'm going to right click and do mask, height field mask by feature. And this is like the most powerful node in height fields, right? This is a node that lets you get very accurate masks. It comes with 5 different features. You have slope, height, peaks and valleys, direction, and occlusion. So if you look at mask by slope, this is going to mask the sloped areas. So if you want the flat areas of your terrain, for example, to put a grass mask or a dirt mask, or if you want the slope parts to put like your rock texture on the slopes or stuff like that. So if I increase the max angle, you see these parts of the terrain here that are very steep, almost vertical. If I increase the max angle, I'm going to mask those areas out. And if I play with the ramp here, you can also get subtle kind of effect, although here it doesn't really matter. It's more on the low end, right? If I increase this, if I increase the low end, I'm going to get 100% coverage, right? So basically, even if I put the max slope to 0, I still have some areas that are not sloped or that are not masked because of the ramp, right? So if I bring this in, I'll get less of a fall off, right? Basically what's happening here is there's a fall off when the slope is really flat so that it's not fully masked. But maybe we don't want that, right? Maybe we want a very sharp mask and we want to just control the want to control the slope like this, right? And then here I can control my minimum slope so I can get some areas that are still grassy. So even on the mountains, right, you could have some grassy areas if they're flat enough, right? So this is how you get a AAA terrain, like when you play these games, you know, like Ghost Recon or Assassin's Creed, right? They're not necessarily using Houdini, but they're using similar techniques, right? Because all the world softwares do this. Okay, so let's turn on mask by height at the same time. Press compute range is going to give me the range for my height field here. And if I decrease the max height, well, hold on, let's turn off mask by slope just so we can see what we're doing here. So if I increase the min height, you can see the mask is clipping. And then if I guess you need to control the ramp. You need to use the ramp here. Yeah, you need the ramp at 0 there. Because yeah, when the height is at the maximum, the value of the mask will be 0. That's what's happening, right? So if I lower this now, this could be useful like if you want to put snow on the top of your mountains, for example, right? You can do something like that. And you can combine it with the slope mask if you wanted to. So if you wanted, I could put this to 1 and then I could you know, if I don't want grass here, right? If I want snow up here, I could reduce, or no, sorry, I still need to put this to 0. But yeah, there, like that, right? So then I could, oh, behaving a little strange. Sorry, my cat's like distracting me too. So what you would want to do is, you'd probably want to invert it actually. So you would, sorry, my cat distracted me and like I don't even remember what I was trying to do. So I wanted, if I want to get the, I want to mask the flat parts, but not at a certain height. Why it's keeping that? I guess it's combining the mask. Um, So I guess a better way to do that, if I hold Alt here, I can duplicate this. I could turn off the height here, or turn off the height here, sorry. And then on the second one, I turn off the slope, I put the height, and then here I could add them or subtract them, or here I could get the control I need, right? So there you go. So now I have the flat part masked, but not at a certain height. So again, even though I didn't really know what I was doing, just by fiddling around, I was able to get it. So again, you don't need to be a genius. I'm clearly not a genius, right? Clearly have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm able to get the correct results. Okay, let's keep playing with this a little bit. So I'll delete that. I'll turn off the mask by slope. Let's look at mask by curvature. So mask by curvature is going to give you mask. Let's put this to linear, or let's put this to flat rather. Put this to, okay, that was a bad idea. Let's put it back to the default. So this is going to give you mask at the top of your peaks, so where the curvature, and at the bottom, so when the curvature becomes 0, right? So either at the top or the bottom. If I invert the ramp, I get the inverted mask. So this one is a little trickier to get good results, but you know, we'll take a look at in future tutorials I'll do. We'll go into this more in detail. There's better examples we can look at, but this is the one I use probably the least. Mask by direction, this one is super cool. So when you see games like Ghost Recon that have like a super realistic biomes and vegetation, this is one of the big tricks they use, is mask by direction, right? So here you can see it's changing the mask sort of like by an angle, right? So if I put it like here, you see the mask is really hitting a lot here and then not on this side, right? And what it's basically doing is, like, you imagine like the sun is here and the sun is pointing this way. There's going to be more vegetation growth where there's sunlight, right? So if there's places like here where the trees are not getting hit by sunlight, you know, let's say the sun goes, you know, at the end of the day, the sun ends here and there's this part of the world never really gets much sunlight. Well, it makes sense that you don't want a mask driving your growth there, right? You don't want, because we use these masks not just for the materials and the textures, but also for the scattering and for driving the biome vegetation distribution, right? So it makes sense that you wouldn't have trees in areas where you're not getting sunlight. Excuse me. So this is a super powerful parameter. And then finally, you have mask by occlusion, which is similar. It's trying to find the areas where there's occlusion, right? So if I play with the ramp a little bit, you know, I can get a similar to what I just did with the direction, right? Where I'm not getting a lot of trees growing where there's occlusion, right? Because they're occluded, they're not visible. It's the same kind of idea, right? But you see, you get a kind of different, you get a different mask, right? So you can get interesting masks that you can play around with. What people typically do as well is they'll use a noise. So I did a height field noise here, and I put on the mask, and then you can generate a noise that you can, you know, subtract from your. If I go, let's get a more interesting mask here. Get something like that. And then I go here, I could subtract the noise from the mask, or I could minimum, I could multiply them, I could take the maximum, can blend them. Oh, that doesn't seem to work super well. But yeah, you can have all kinds of control like that, right? And typically you'll layer multiple noises, right? So you'll change the thing, and then you can use this for your masks, you can use this for your shader, you can use this to put attributes on your vegetation to tint their shaders, stuff like that. And one last thing I forgot to show is when you have your noise, right, and you offset it, you can create a completely new terrain just by offsetting the noise, right? So here I have this terrain. If I add like another, I get a completely different terrain. If I add another offset, I get a completely different terrain. So you can create tons of maps. Once you have a good formula, you can create tons of maps that, you can obviously tweak things. You don't want them to all look exactly the same, right? But you can see you can get all kinds of different maps like very quickly. This is why people love procedural, right? So that's pretty much it. So last thing I'll show is, again, if you're into games, terrain is the easiest way to start, I think, because it's very easy, it's very intuitive, you have these great examples, and you have a million tutorials online that you can take it further, right? But if you're into FX, especially like if you're into cinematics or offline FX, then you are Houdini's #1 customer, and like they got you big time. If you go here, they have so many shelf tools for FX, like over 100. And by the way, in the documentation, you have often even more detailed examples. But for example, if I go on Pyro FX and I do sparse fireball, and then I click in the scene, I put this on. I don't know why it's not working. Let's go inside the Pyro source. If you go on the Pyro source, you can see on the burst animation, start frames 3, right? So if you're on frame 1, you're not going to see anything. You have to go to frame 3, okay? And then here you can play with all the parameters just like we were doing with terrain, right? So if you want to change the spread angle, if you want to change the direction, you want to change the number of trails, stuff like that, you can go nuts here, right? And then this gets fed into a volume rasterize attributes, which is going to turn those particles into a volume that you're going to be able to use in your FX. And here, apparently it's so here when you see it's blue, it means the parameters linked up. This is something I didn't cover in this video. It's a beginner feature that I'll cover in the next video. But basically this parameter is linked to this number. So if I set this to 004, this is 004, and this is controlling the resolution of the sim, right? So I'm increasing the resolution. Now let's see, did that fix the simulation? Something's really this was working. So I actually recorded this video twice because the first time I had a webcam issue. And it worked the first time, but now it's not working. Strange. Okay, let's try deleting everything. Hello. Give it a second to crash here. I don't think it's gonna crash, but it's definitely slow. Okay, let's try again. So if I click sparse fireball, not gonna work, right? It's really weird. It was literally working the first time. So, Houdini, it still has bugs, right? And it's hard to manage a software this complex without having a lot of bugs. I might even have to reboot my Houdini, which I don't want to do. Let's try a different one. Let's try the billowy smoke. Okay, so this one works. So the billowy smokes works, sort of. All right, there we go. So make sure you put the blue flag on this if you want to see it. So here you have the billowy smoke, and they show you exactly how to do this, right? It starts with the torus, use a pyro source, which is going to create a density and a temperature, which is basically what you need for pyro. Although for smoke, you don't even need a temperature, I don't think. Here they're adding some noise to the velocities, what it looks like. So if you want to visualize that, you can actually, well, here there is no velocity, but if you press here, you press this, you can actually see the velocities. And if you play with this, you can see how the noise is affecting it. So you can actually control your input velocities like that. Um, and they're animating the noise. So if you press play, you'll see the noise is animating. So that's how you get an interesting, that's how they're getting an interesting billowy smoke. And then here there are volume rasterized attributes, which is going to prepare it for the simulation. Then it's here. You don't even need this, I don't think. If I delete this, yeah, it still works. So some of the stuff is old. A lot of stuff gets changed, but I mean, it still works. Oh no, apparently you do need that. Some of this stuff is old. There's new workflows that are. Oh, looks like I totally broke it. So yeah, you have to be careful. Looks like the, the effects tools were behaving a lot better the first time I recorded this, but I'm sure if I rebooted Houdini, it would be fine. You also have the ocean tools. These are super cool. These are plug and play. RBD is takes a little more knowledge, but again, very easy. I showed this in my last video. I'll go more in depth in the future. Vellum is super cool for like cloth, hair, clothes, creatures, like tentacles, stuff like that. And where's my, oh yeah, fluids, right? So the fluids is a little bit less plug and play. This I wouldn't, these shelf tools don't really work magically. You need to kind of know what you're doing a little bit, but again, you could still get a lot of information just by, even if I make like a flip tank, for example, right? It'll create all the nodes for me, right? So it'll make the flip tank with all the stuff, the ocean source. So this is kind of complicated, very complicated actually, right? So, don't worry about details like this. If you're in games, start with the terrain. This is a beginner tutorial, right? So the point is not to create anything, it's just to familiarize yourself with the software. We're going to create stuff in future tutorials when we get a little bit better, a little more comfortable, right? So that's pretty much it for this episode. I'm going to show you real quick what we're going to do in the next episodes. Or first of all, let me show you where you can learn more, right, if you're interested. So if you go on the Houdini website, you go to tutorials. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of tutorials. You can do it by category. So you even have like machine learning, how to train your own ML system, stuff like that. You have basically everything, right? You have destruction. You have game dev specific stuff. Look at this. You have 14 pages of, most of these are free, by the way. And then if you go here, the content library, you have a whole other set of stuff. Again, tons of categories. And all of these come with the files, right? So this one, this creature setup, I can download the files. And I can see, ideally, if it's set up correctly, I'm going to see exactly how this was done, right? So you can learn so much just by downloading other people's work and seeing how they did it. Because once you download the files, you have all the nodes, similar to what we were just doing for the last half hour there. You're going to have all the nodes. You're going to be able to see exactly how they did it. Now, in future episodes, so this is the ultimate beginner's guide to learning Houdini for games, right? So in the future, I'm going to be going over some of the tech demos. If you go to tech demos, and again, you could do this yourself if you don't want to wait, but in the future, I'm going to be covering some of these tech demos. So you have stuff like Project Elderwood, where they made a bunch of vegetation assets. I haven't actually looked at this yet, but apparently it uses Natsura plugin, which is super cool. We'll look at that. You have Project Skylark, where they made this stylized kind of open world city, or I don't think it's playable, the city, but it's an open world environment. You have Project Grot, which has a bunch of tools. You have Project Pegasus, which is another open world demo. And you have Project Titan. So if you look at Project Titan, for example, it has all these tools. Like you have a building tool, and fences, cables, cloth, scaffolding. They show you how to make all of this stuff. So I'm going to go over these tools in future episodes. I'm going to show you how to get all these, how to get access to all these, how to pick them apart. I'm going to give my tips, my recommendations, what I like, what I think could be improved, So I'm going to help you guys work through these projects, because these projects are the best way to learn Houdini. They come, look at these tools. These are incredible, right? We're going to learn how to make all these tools. You don't even have to wait for me. You can literally go download these things or watch these videos yourself, okay? But if it's too complicated for you, then wait for the next video. I'm going to simplify all of these things for you, okay? So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it and have a good one.